Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Spiritual Business School podcast. My name is Muni, and I'm your host, and you can find out everything you need to know about becoming a spiritual entrepreneur, launching your own spiritual business, and so much more on my website, themooniverse.com. In today's episode, we're going to meet publishing expert Shannon Godwin. Now, Shannon's worked with publishing companies all over the U.S., some of the biggest names around, including Hay House, which is where I met her. So we're going to go back to the very beginning of the process of publishing a book and learn all about the difference between traditional publishing, self-publishing, and what you can do to make sure that your book has the best chance for success. You're also going to get insider tips from Shannon on how to find an agent and working with an editor. And if you've never worked with an editor before, you've never kind of dipped your toes into the world of publishing, it can be a little bit of a mystery that's hard to uncover everything that you need to be doing. It's hard to kind of figure out who all the players are and how they all fit together. And then if you're going to go the route of self-publishing, all of those roles and responsibilities will usually fall on you, and it can get really expensive if you don't know what you're doing. And with somebody like Shannon on your side as a guide and a resource, you're going to be able to get that book up and running faster than you ever thought possible and easier than you ever thought possible, which is something I think is incredibly valuable when you consider all the things you have to do as a spiritual entrepreneur. So if you've ever dreamed of launching that book or you have one in the cooker, take a listen to this podcast episode, see if it sparks any interest or inspiration on the process of becoming a published author in the spiritual space. If you have any questions about this episode, please send me an email at podcast@themooniverse.com, and I'll answer your questions on next week's study session. Without further ado, here's our interview with Shannon. You're going to love her Southern accent and all the wonderful things she has to share with you. Okay, let's hit it. I truly believe that we are spiritual beings having a human experience here on this earth. What you learn here could change the direction of your entire life. This could be the beginning of a whole new career for you. My name is Muni, and I'm a spiritual entrepreneur. Now more than ever, the world needs spiritual leaders, teachers, and guides. Are you ready to become one of them? If you're ready, I'm ready. Okay, Shannon, we're here. It's our first ever podcast together.
It's great to be here, Muni. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for letting me be a part of the Mooniverse.
Of course. I'm happy to have you here. And, of course, nobody out there should know that I didn't, force you to eat lunch with me right beforehand. So
it was very healthy, and Muni's a great cook.
I bribed you. So I'm excited to have you here because I want to talk about publishing in the spiritual space. So for those of you who don't know who Shannon is, she is a publishing professional and an expert in all things editing, publishing, and sales when it comes to books and ebooks and even movies and videos. Yeah. So that's your background, and I brought Shannon on board, because I love Shannon, and we work together really well. We have a great rapport, but also because I want to bring you this level of expertise so that you too can have a little bit of a mindset about, okay, you have this idea for a business. Okay, you have this idea for something you want to create, or you have this message within you that just needs to come out. But before you even put pen to paper, or before you even put your finger on the keyboard to start writing your book, which is a whole other conversation, I really want to dive into discussing what's going to make the biggest impact. What are the elements that go into the publishing of a book so that you can kind of begin with the end in mind to say, okay, if I know that I'm going to write this book and I'm going to want it to land in this particular place, what do I need to do in order to set that up and have it work out exactly the way I want to, or in some version of the way that I want to, or however it's guided to be created. So with that, all of that heavy stuff that I just said, Shannon, let's talk about a little bit about your experience publishing. So Shannon and I worked together when we were at Hay House, so we can talk about that a little bit. So what was your title at Hay House, and how did that pertain to the overall picture of publishing there?
At Hay House, I was the senior manager for domestic distribution. That means I oversaw the team who handled sales and production of the books in the United States and Canada. We've worked with Amazon, Barnes & Noble, two of the big sellers, Books A Million. We've worked with major distributors, Ingram, Baker & Taylor, smaller distributors who specialize in the spiritual space, such as New Leaf. So, in that role, we really, as a team, got very familiar with the physical books, the digital space, and really what the buyers are looking for. So it makes sense that, you've got an idea, you believe in your idea, you want to bring your idea to the world, but Muni and I are here to really show you steps to make it easier for you, because there's nothing harder than having to teach yourself to write your own book and to get in your own space when you really don't have an insider's knowledge of the space and an insider's knowledge of how to succeed in the space. So, being here and talking to you about things that you can think about early on before you go further in your career and before you go further with writing your book is going to make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, and help you get there faster.
Absolutely.
And Shannon knows of what she speaks, because I would imagine thousands of books went past your desk and through your computer when you were working at Hay House. So there's books of all shapes and sizes, of names of people that you know, names of people that you've never heard of, names of people that you're going to hear about one day. So I think that there was a seen it all, done it all kind of stamp of approval on Shannon, if I'm going to be so bold, to give you that stamp, because I know you have. I've been
in the publishing and entertainment industry for over 20 years. Mm-hmm. So during that time, I've seen the rise and fall of the superstore. I've seen the rise of the digital space and Amazon. There's been a lot of changes, but one thing stays the same: the audience really does respond to good books and strong messages. And if you've got a good book in you and a strong message, then let's help you get that out there so you can be successful at it.
I love it. Let's get started. Okay, so I want to talk about. Let's go back to the very, very beginning, the basic beginnings of what is publishing, and specifically what is traditional, because it's a big choice I think everyone has to make at the very beginning part of this process: traditional publishing versus self-publishing. So Shannon, can you talk a little bit about traditional publishing when it comes to spiritual books?
Sure.
What is it? Traditional
publishing means you work with an established publishing house to publish your book.
And that could be like a Hay House.
That could be a Hay House. It could be a Random House. It could be Algonquin Press. It can be a big company. It can be a small company, but it is an already established publishing house that already has a staff on hand to walk you through the publishing process.
Okay.
And to get your book out there.
And then self-publishing is
the complete opposite.
So in self-publishing, and correct me if I'm like keep me on honest
Sure.
over here, Shannon. But self-publishing is when you are responsible for all the things that go into making your book a reality.
Yes.
And I think that is something that we should talk about, because traditional publishing, if you can get it, which is a huge part of it.
If you can get it.
If you can get a traditional publishing deal, then what is that experience like? You have somebody take your book, you have somebody, edit it, turn it into this beautiful, wonderful thing, give the message its best setting,
yes.
Polish it up, make it beautiful, put a beautiful cover on it, do all the research, all the market research, all the sales, all the things that go into making a book successful, even like what kind of paper you're printing on, what font you're using, what color it is, all the things that they know because they've published thousands or hundreds of thousands of titles of books. You have the expertise of a publishing company doing all of those things, making all of those decisions for you and with you.
Yes.
To help your book have the best chance for success.
Yes.
And that's even like picking a date for publishing.
Oh, yeah.
All of the stuff. Versus self-publishing, where all those things we just listed, you're on your own.
You're on your own.
And let's talk a little bit about how traditional publishing can be amazing, and then how maybe sometimes it can be a little not amazing. Because I know some people have had some challenging experiences with the traditional publishing route. So tell me why, Shannon, just from your perspective, is traditional publishing amazing?
Traditional publishing is amazing because you have help. It's amazing. You're working with a company that has established editors, they have established salespeople, they have established in-house art teams, and the list of other departments within the company goes on. Yes, the relationships. You've got a publicity department that's friends with the person who does the booking for the Today Show. So, there's a lot of upside with working, and going a traditional publishing route. The downside of that is that once you do go that route, you may not have the final sale for the cover. The editor is going to push you in a direction, and she's going to want the book to be as good as it possibly can, but, it could be conflict. You may not be feeling great about those changes that are being requested. It takes a longer time from the time a publishing house says, okay, I want to publish your book and pays you for it, to the time it's published, it can be a year and a half or 2 years from the time you sell your book to a publisher before they get it into the marketplace, just because of their process. So the upside is the process is established, and it can be great to work within those confines, but you don't have quite the control that you have when you do self-publishing.
And typically what happens if I were to get a book deal and I'm selling my book, so the book becomes, the publishing company owns the book,
Yes.
correct? So you're giving away, in exchange for money, you're giving away the rights to the book.
Yes.
To the publisher.
Yes, I mean, we often will hear about advances, book advances, and this is what the editor, an editor will pay a book advance as sort of guaranteed for sales coming in. So I'll say, hey, Muni, I love this book. I'm going to pay you $25,000 for rights to publish it. So that means that once I earn my $25,000 out, then you start getting your money. So yes.
So it's not like you're getting a bonus check.
So that's not a bonus check.
It's an advance. It's not kidding when it says the word advance. It's an advance against future sales of your book.
Yes, advances are real.
Yeah, so anyone that thinks that they're going to get $1 million advance and they've made it the big time, the reality is there's $1 million worth of books that need to get sold before you see another dollar from any of your sales. So I just want everyone to be really clear about that an advance is not free money.
No, it is not free money. And unfortunately, there have been a lot of new authors who perhaps felt that it was, and it's just created problems for their work. It's problems for all parties involved.
Well, the expectations, I think.
The expectations. Just because, unmet expectations can cause problems or, misunderstanding what the process is.
Right, which is why we're here talking about this. Because all of you out there listening, we want you to make sure that you have at least a working knowledge of the language even that's used in the publishing industry and how all the components fit together and how you can make the best decision for you, whether it be trying to pursue a relationship with a traditional publisher or branching out on your own and going in the direction of self-publishing, which is what I want to talk about next, is what are the positives of self-publishing, especially in the spiritual space.
Self-publishing, there's a lot of positives. One thing is that you have control over your message and complete control. You don't have to get approval from anyone else. You have
the
complete
only person
control.
you're answering to is yourself.
You.
Yeah.
You can, your book can be the way you want it. If you want to hire an editor, you can. If you don't, you really don't have to. I recommend it. I think it's very helpful to the writing process and to just polishing your work up and being the best that you can be. But if you don't want to, you don't have to.
Right. And you, as a self-publisher, are responsible for finding the editor, vetting the editor, finding the designer, vetting them, choosing whether or not you want your book to be a certain size, what kind of paper, all those decisions. And if you are that type of person, and there are people out there that are incredible at this, that they can manage a project, they can manage themselves, they can take care of this, they can set goals, they can achieve them.
And they love it.
And they love it. They love it. And that would be the situation in which you would want to self-publish.
Yeah, you're working on, as self-publisher, working on your schedule. Another upside to self-publishing is if the time comes and you want to pull the book down and do work on it and put the book back up, you can do that. You own the file.
You own the rights. You own everything about it. Yeah.
So, once you're working with a publisher, an established publisher, again, there's upside to that as well, but you won't have the flexibility. Won't be as easy because there's a lot of other factors going into it.
So self-publishing is great because you control the schedule. So if you decide that, because you talk to a business astrologer and you want your book to come out on October 21st, let's just say, based on your chart or based on a specific date or it's your birthday or whatever you want to do, or it's outside of Mercury retrograde, which I know a lot of people are concerned about, then you get to control what date the book goes up. You get to control all of the elements that go into it, but you're doing it without a team of experts, right? You're doing it without a publishing team. You're doing it without editorial. You're doing it without an art department. You're doing it without a publicity team. And those things can all be really difficult to coordinate if you don't have the time and resources, and specifically resources, to be able to get it done. And a lot of people don't know how to do it on their own. So publishing is not an easy thing. I think that's something that maybe I have a limiting belief around, but I feel like to publish a book or writing the book is one thing, but to get the book actually published, whether you choose, traditional or self, there's a commitment.
There is a commitment. There was a time where the attitude was, if you publish it, they will come. That is not necessarily it. You have to put it out there, and you have to make it findable, and you have to get your message out there for people to respond to it. But I think there's really strong arguments that can be made for both sides. You just have to really look at yourself and decide, where your energy is at and where you want it to be, and pursue it. And you can always try to pursue a traditional publishing, opportunity. And if that doesn't work, well, then you can self-publish. I mean, it doesn't have to be all or nothing either way, but it is something to think about. And
now, are there people who have self-published their book that have gone on to later be traditionally published?
Yes, there are. One thing that I know traditional publishers have started looking at is performance of self-published authors. There are a number of situations where someone has found work online or seen books sell, and then decided, publisher has decided to see if the author will sell them the rights, so then they can put it through traditional channels. And sometimes they'll update the cover. One story of that, I'll give you a prime example, is Karen Noe, an author at Hay House. She started as self-published through their self-publishing arm, and because the book performed well and she still continued her outreach and her marketing and her brand after the book came out, Hay House then went to her and decided to acquire the rights to her book and then put it through traditional channels. So, that's an experience of someone who self-published and then went on to actually get a book deal with the publisher she wanted to work with.
Right. So it can happen.
It can happen.
So when you're making the decision, I think, between traditional versus self-publishing, there's a lot to consider. And the dream, I think, is for some people to get the traditional publishing. But let's talk about, I sell my book to a traditional publisher. How do I control the message? How do I prevent the book from becoming something I don't want it to be? Because I think that might be a fear that people have around the traditional publishing, is that, okay, well, if I give my book away and I sell the rights to it, then I don't have control anymore.
I feel, it can be very scary, but the two biggest fears that I've run across consistently was fear about not having final cover approval and occasionally fears about having to make changes. One thing an editor, and there's a lot, if you'll give me a minute, Muni, I'd like to address the role of the editor.
Yes, let's talk about the editor.
Yes, let's talk about the editor. Whether your editor is editing at Random House, whether you hire a freelance editor, the editor is there to help you make your book the best it can be. That's one thing that can hold a lot of authors back in getting, book deals, is because there's the belief like, oh, well, an edit can just edit it. And they're thinking, oh, an editor can just help me rewrite it. It does not work that way.
Right.
The book needs to be in very good shape before it goes out to an editor, because they're looking, hey, is there something here that I can help clean up and publish? I mean, if you're getting into an editor needing to rewrite your whole book because of all these issues, they don't have the time and they're not going to accept the book.
Or if you're hiring someone freelance, it's going to be very, very expensive.
Yeah, it can be very expensive. Again, but it is good to have those third-person eyes on your book. It's good to have someone who's not your mom and your friend, whose job is to know the genre, to know what's out there.
They're professionals.
They're professionals. They know.
And they're going to give you professional advice.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that we're all guilty of doing, is we fall in love with our ideas. And, but it's just such a great sentence. Or sometimes it's even a word or a phrase and something that's just, really clunky. And an editor will tell you, okay, but, this is not going to land. That's the language I feel like I've had conversations before. It's not going to land with the audience the way that you think it's going to.
It's going to thud. It's not going to
it's going to thud.
Sing.
It's not going to sing. And I think that's something that a lot of, when you're in the process of trying to get your book published, is you have to kind of let go. But I also say that with the mindset of, you can't let all the way go. You can't just hand the keys over and say, okay, now it's your turn to make my book a book. You have to be part of the process. You have to stay engaged. You have to be part of the conversation, but you also have to listen. A professional expert is telling you, one way or the other, that something needs to change, and you, I guess, have to decide, are you going to listen and do it, or are you not going to listen and continue doing what you want to do? And in some cases, you might be right, and in other cases you might be wrong, but when it comes to the editing structure, I'm not an editor, you know what I mean? I wouldn't trust myself to edit a book correctly, and it wouldn't be something I'd even want to do. I'd want to write the book, I'd want to be creative, but the editing seems like homework.
Yeah. Well, the editing, because I've done both. I've done sales and editing. Editing can be a lot of fun. I've always loved working with authors. I've done a lot of editing, fiction, nonfiction, spirituality, self-help. I've worked with some authors, self-published authors who were looking to get their voice out there. It's a lot of fun. So don't be scared by it. I mean, I know it can be overwhelming. That's what Muni and I are here for, to demystify the process.
Yes.
But be aware of what the role is and understand what that collaboration looks like, because it's important to surround yourself with people you trust.
Right.
So you can trust the collaboration.
So let's circle back, because now that we know the difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing, which I know it seems like we should kind of know, but it doesn't hurt to say it, to hear it again from experts.
Yeah.
That this is the major difference between traditional publishing and self-publishing. If you do go the traditional publishing route, it's not like you need to hit a Harper One. Publishing houses, can we talk a little bit about how publishing houses have imprints? Like, what is an imprint technically?
An imprint is a division of the publisher. And I'll give you a prime example. I know I use Random House a lot simply because I worked there and I can use firsthand experience. There's Random House, or they're now Penguin Random House. Penguin and Random House have merged. But it's like having a bunch of sub-companies within an umbrella company. So, within Random House, there's a lot of different divisions in Random House. Even though they're all technically part of the company Random House, you'll have Knopf, you'll have Crown, you'll have, Doubleday, you've got Bantam. So there's a lot of other individual sub-companies within that major company.
And usually do those
That's
imprints, usually those imprints handle a specific type of book?
Yes. Each imprint has a very distinct publishing program that may not instantly be obvious, but, do some research out there. For example, Atria / Beyond Words. Beyond Words is actually technically the name of the publisher who did The Secret. Mm-hmm. But Beyond Words was part of Atria, which is part of Simon & Schuster.
Right. So you have to kind of follow the chain. You have to follow the clues to go back to which big publishing company you're working with, and you won't necessarily be working with, the VP of a huge company. You may be working with the editor-in-chief of a smaller imprint.
Absolutely. Think of it as the NFL. You have the NFL, which is the league, but within the league, you've got a lot of different teams.
Exactly.
And each team has its own identity, personality, and the way of doing things.
And you want to be with the right team.
You absolutely
so you wouldn't want to
team.
be publishing a spiritual book with a publishing wing that does mechanical engineering. It wouldn't fit. It wouldn't make sense.
And they wouldn't accept it anyway, probably.
Exactly.
They'd be like, why did you send me this?
This is wrong. But yeah, I think that imprint thing is really important because we all hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And I think we don't necessarily always know which imprint is connected to which publishing company. But to be selected by an imprint, I don't know, I guess there's this perception that you should get your book selected by the big name brand publishing company, but in reality, the imprint is going to get you a lot further than going with being swallowed alive by the huge part of the company that everybody knows, the public side. Mm-hmm. Like Simon & Schuster, for example, you get your book published at Simon & Schuster. That's a big company with a lot of books and a lot of things happening, mm-hmm. and a lot of attention being split across a lot of different things. Versus you get a book published with Atria or Beyond Words, and they know the spiritual space, they have the spiritual connections, they know the industry, they can help get your book into the right hands, they have all those relationships. So that niche, it's like a part of the niching process. That imprint is going to match the niche of your book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're in doubt, next time you go to your bookstore, and it's also listed online if you prefer to look online, but if you do go to a bookstore, just look at the spine of the book. Say, I know I like this author. Look at the spine of the book. Who published the book? And then go back to your computers and, do a quick search and read all about them. See what they're about. See who their other authors are. Is this someone you would fit in with? Mm-hmm. Do you think that your book would be like the crowning jewel in the program? And that's kind of how you have to think about it.
And that's true too, is even if you go to some of the larger companies, you could do I do always search, just Google search. You could say Simon & Schuster spiritual publishing wing or spiritual publishing imprint, and you Google it and see what comes up. Or you could Google spiritual publishing imprints in general and see what comes up.
Or top spiritual publishers.
Yeah.
that should give you a list too.
Exactly. So it takes a little bit of digging and some research, but once you start to find it and you see the patterns, it'll start to make sense.
And we're here, hopefully this is helping you, because the digging and the research can take up so much time, but if you know what to look for and you know the things to consider, then, it should move along quickly for you.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so we talked about traditional versus self-publishing a little bit, and we talked about we're talking about mainstream versus niche, and that's really the idea of imprints and why they have imprints, because it just helps everybody identify it. It's a certain set of resources and team members that can help you.
And not only that, the business world it harkens back to what Muni and I were saying earlier about having that core idea and building around the core idea. That's, an imprint is a perfect example of a business that had a core idea and built their business around that core idea.
Right, and so that's the through line here. I think everyone needs to keep paying attention to is that when you go into the process of creating the mindset of I'm going to publish my book, that you have to have that core idea in place, because the more you have that idea in place, the more traditional publishers can find you. And the more you have that idea in place, the more relationships and connections you can make that are all going to be in the direction of you finding exactly the place where your book needs to be. And I think that's really great. I love that we're going to keep bringing that up. So let's talk a little bit about getting an agent, because I think a lot of people have a certain idea, maybe, and I even do, about what is it like? What's a book agent? What is a book agent? What do they do?
A book agent is the go-between between the author and the publishing house.
Okay.
The agent is like your manager, your business representative. The agent will have relationships with editors, and what happens is when you partner with an agent or an agent decides to take you on, the agent will then submit your book to her wheelhouse or his wheelhouse of editors for your book to be considered. It's an in with a lot of publishing companies. I know that some houses only want to see work that's been represented by an agent. So, they do the negotiation for you. They'll negotiate your contract. It's nice because it keeps you and your editor fully focused on the work, while someone else has to be sort of the pit bull fighting for you to get the best deal you can get.
Yeah, and we as spiritual entrepreneurs, I think it's sometimes hard for us to tap into that pit bull mentality. And it's nice to have one in the form of an external agent that can handle those decisions for you and really push to get you, a great deal.
Yeah.
Which is something that will always feel good to know that you got something you can feel proud about. Or in other circumstances, just protect you. But the agent is paid off of how? How does the agent get paid for the
agent
relationship?
gets a percentage. Usually an agent will get about, I believe, 15% of the deal. So an agent is going to take a portion of your money to represent you. It could be, if you're the right kind of person, then it's great to have that advocate so you don't have to be the heavy. It's also great to have that person who knows the editors and knows what they're looking for and has relationships with them. So that's definitely an upside. But the agent is going to take a cut after the deal is negotiated.
Which they should totally get.
Absolutely.
Because again, we're about creating an opportunity for all of us to kind of succeed. And it's all part of the relationship and the dynamic of publishing.
And not only that, there's value. An agent has put in a lot of time to maintain those relationships and to really learn what different editors at different publishing houses want. So, there's expertise there too, just as you want to be to share your expertise and get compensated for that, then of course they do as well.
Okay. And then is that 15% usually off of just a certain time period, or is it for the life of the book?
I believe it's for the life of the book, but again, it's going to be
case by case.
It's case by case. I mean, 15% is sort of the industry standard, but that might change depending on the format you use. A digital sales versus print book sales, or just depending on the agent.
Exactly.
So read your fine print.
Read the fine print, and then let's talk about when you don't have an agent. I know that there's a term that's used. It's called unagented, which is a funny way of saying you don't have an agent, but I guess it makes sense. So in publishing, talk about unagented authors. How are they viewed? What is an unagented author when it comes to the publishing world?
And it's just that. If you're at a major publishing house, you really rely on your agents to do some pre-screening for you. If you're an editor working for even a small publisher, you're getting so many submissions a week that it actually can take up all of your time to the point where you have no time to edit.
Oh, wow.
Or even work with the authors you have. It's very time consuming. So, an agent can go in and do sort of that pre-screening. So if there's a well-known agent that likes your book and wants to represent you, that already sends the message, oh, this is a good book that's at a certain place with quality.
It's like fast-tracked almost.
Fast-tracked, yeah.
You know, they've done all the quality assurance, and they've made sure that it looks good and it's got a good message, and there's something about it that they find attractive or saleable, and so they're taking it, and it's kind of leaping ahead of unagented, I can't even say the word, unagented
it's a mouthful.
Authors. Yeah, it is. But unagented authors, those submissions, there are places to send them. You can find where to send those books, right? So if you've done the legwork and you've edited it and you have a manuscript or, you know, a book proposal, usually it's the full manuscript that gets sent. And then you can find where to send that, right?
Usually you can. If you go to each individual, like if you know where you want to submit your book, go to the websites. Most publishers and agents are very, very clear on their websites about how they want submissions to come.
Okay.
And if they don't accept, you know, a lot of times they'll say unsolicited submissions. That's a word you'll see. That means unagented.
Okay.
Or it means
what happens if they say they don't accept it?
Do not send it.
Okay. So
Because they
let's
don't
be really
accept
clear,
it. You're
everybody.
not going to sneak through. You're not going to be the one who gets in because they're not even going to read it.
So
You're
if
not
it
gonna
says
look
on the
at it.
website no unsolicited submissions, then save your stamp money and save your paper and your ink on your printer and don't send it.
Don't, because they don't want to see it. And, you know, it's just because it's unwieldy, but they don't want to see it. Don't send it.
So it's not a wing and a prayer situation.
No, you're not going to be the one who slips in. You know, you're not going to be so. If they'll just take a look, they won't even look at it. I can tell you, they won't.
Okay.
And it's nothing personal to you. It's just the process.
And that's the truth of it. So talk to me about what is the process for getting an agent, specifically in the spiritual space, because that I think it's different.
It's different.
It's got a different feel to it.
My number one go-to advice on researching agents and finding an agent who might be right for you is to think about what other books are in the marketplace that may have a similar voice, a similar audience, or a similar message. I mean, obviously your book is unique and stands on its own, but you know, if you know that you're writing, if your book is about a near-death experience, then, you know, Dying to Be Me, Anita Moorjani, that's a book you should look at. And if you look in the acknowledgement sections of the book, usually they'll say, I'd like to thank my agent, and then you can get the name of the agent.
That's sneaky.
Yes,
that's really good.
That's one place to look. If you're, you know, online, usually they'll have the acknowledgements page in the digital sample that, like, you know, the little excerpt you can see online. That's a great way to do it. If that doesn't work, you can Google, you know, go to Google and look up, you know, self-help spirituality agents. Sometimes lists will come up. Or just research the author. If it's not in the acknowledgement section or if it's not clear, sometimes they have it listed on their website. Or you can you know, find an interview where they may mention it. Just look up the author's name and then agent. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about finding an agent, but I think that's probably the fastest and easiest way to start building a list of people you might want to send your book to.
Okay. And then once you send your book out, what happens?
You usually wait. And you wait and you wait. It depends, and I know I keep coming back to it depends. What you cannot expect is a full critique of your book. If an agent takes the time to give you that, then great, but most agents don't have time, and they're not your writing teacher. So, you know, there's a lot of frustration, I think, from authors that feel, well, what was wrong with it? But it's a lot like a job interview. You know, if you didn't get the job, that the interview didn't go the way you wanted it to, you may not get feedback on why. Mm-hmm. So one thing to expect is you may not get, you know, usually the reason they say is, I didn't connect with this book, or it wasn't quite right for me. You know, best of luck placing it somewhere else. Mm-hmm. It's always a blow when you get letters like that, but try not to let your personal self get too caught up in it, because it's all about finding the right partner and the right fit. And you're going to want someone who believes in you and who believes in your book to be representing it.
So let's talk about the dream scenario of you send your manuscript in, you find the agent, the website says, you know, submissions welcome, you send in your stuff, and then what is that first phone call usually, or that email, that response?
That first phone call or email is, I am interested in representing your book. Sometimes it's, I would like you to do revisions, and then I'd like to see it. know this: if they don't ask for revisions, don't send them revisions. They don't. I mean, I know it's brutal, but if they're interested in your work, they'll ask for more. If they're not, they won't. So again, don't feel like you're going to be the one, dazzle them. They probably won't take another look at it.
So if you submitted your book once, and then you do an edit or revisions or something kind of changes, and then you try to submit it again, but you haven't heard on the first one,
don't.
There's usually a chance that you won't hear about the second one.
And some agents will let you know if it's a pass. Some agents have a policy that if you don't hear from me in 6 to 8 weeks, assume it's a pass. Every agent is different about how they want their submissions sent to them and how they respond. But,
so be prepared for anything.
Be prepared for anything, including ghosting. including them disappearing.
But is there any way to kind of gracefully, because I know that persistence, I think, is something that we in the spiritual community are really good at, is keeping our hope in the right place and our intentions in the right place. Is there a graceful way to follow up? Or a graceful way to keep getting in touch, or just to, if you haven't heard back and it's been a couple of weeks, and is there a way to communicate and say, I just wanted to follow up if you have any additional questions? Is there anything that would be good practices for making sure that it doesn't get lost in the mix?
Absolutely.
Because what we're talking about here, and this is a phrase that we'll use, and I lovingly use it because I mentally created a picture of it, is it's the slush pile.
The slush pile.
It's the slush pile. And magical things can happen in the slush pile.
They really can.
Yeah.
The author, James Michener, was a slush pile author.
Yeah.
I actually had worked, she was recommended. There is a writer, she's now a well-known blogger, she's been on Steve Harvey, her name's Jenny Trout. I found her in the slush pile. So, these things do happen.
Right. And I think, at Hay House specifically, we had there's a Cinderella story of E Squared by Pam Grout. And Pam Grout was not a spiritual author. She had written articles in magazines and newspapers. I think she had a very journalistic background. And she had this idea for this book. And so she submitted it to Hay House, and it was in the slush pile. And then an editorial assistant, because that's what their jobs are, right? Yeah. Is to go and read the slush pile if they do accept submissions. So they're reading the book. The book was great. The book got, passed up, and it got passed up, and it kept getting sent up the chain until finally it was said, okay, this book is a beautiful little, magic book. And the Hay House decided to publish it, and it was a New York Times bestseller.
We couldn't keep it in stock.
Yeah,
it kept selling out.
I know. And so there are magical things that I want to repeat that. I want everyone to hear it. There are magical things that happen in the slush pile. So if all the things we just told you, about, if they don't accept submissions, definitely don't send them. But if they do accept submissions, take your chance. I think that's the thing. If Pam Grout had said, well, I don't know, or if James Michener had said, I don't know, and they had just thought for a minute, well, maybe it's not worth it, they would never have known. They would never have found out how great their work was because they didn't take the risk of doing the work and sending it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to take the chance. I mean, we can't publish something if it doesn't exist.
Right.
And furthermore, one thing that's fantastic is a lot of these agents, because of being online and because of the author community, a lot of these agents will do interviews with bloggers, and they'll tell you what they're looking for. They'll tell you what they want. So, just a few minutes in front of the computer typing in names and looking at what comes up can go a long way.
I think you said it perfectly. It's knowing what to look for.
Knowing what to look for.
Which is why we're here to help.
Exactly. And so you've got to go for it, and you've got to take your chance. Most agents are very nice. They're if they decide to pass on a project, they'll be very nice about it. They'll be very communicative. If they say, this project isn't right, good luck. That means don't send it to them. But again, they may say, hey, would you revise and resubmit? And in that case, do it.
But do they give you instructions on what they're looking for?
If everything that they're traditionally looking for is on their website, but if they see your individual book, and if they don't feel that it's quite ready, needs a little more work, and they want to see what you can do, go for it. Because they're also looking at how well you revise. One thing that's going to be important no matter what is revision. Even no matter what publishing outlet you go, you're probably at some point going to need to do some revisions on your book. And I can say if you wrote a book from beginning to end and didn't need any revisions, I would challenge that.
or you're made of magic, or you channeled it and it was from a place.
Or you were at a higher consciousness than than I'm working at.
So I'm glad that you brought that up, because that brings us to one of the most important parts I have found of the creative process, which is editing.
Yes.
So we talked a little bit about editors and editing, and we just started to touch on that. But what is an editor when it comes to publishing? What is the editor? How do they fit into the team?
An editor is someone who is on the lookout for new books to acquire for a company, new books to take on for a company to publish. And then once they take those books on and work with those authors, they're everything from the person you brainstorm with for your next book, the person you brainstorm with to solve issues that may be in this book. But they're really going to go through your work and make your voice shine. They're looking to make your book the best book that can possibly be. There's, it's not about commas and spelling, although all of those things are very important. It's really about, they help you say what you want to say in the best way it can be said.
So they're really like a partner.
They're a partner. It's a very collaborative relationship. And, they have a level of expertise. You're an expert on your book topic. They're an expert on helping authors with their voices and make their voices shine.
So an editor is not somebody who's breathing down your neck, or maybe usually not, because I feel like there's a perception.
If you miss your deadlines, they're going to be breathing down your neck.
But I think that's the perception I think you see in film and television and movies, which is how a lot of times if you haven't written a book or you're not part of publishing, that's your exposure to it. Is that the editor is always calling you and yelling and looking for you and this and that. How do you create, for those of us who are fortunate enough to be in a relationship where we are going to have that kind of partnership with an editor, how do you be a good author for that editor?
Keep an open mind. I tend to, I know I include this with revision letters when I've done an edit for an author. I always include a letter of overall arching points, then I have notes in the margin. But take a few deep breaths. Breathe, sleep on it. Because the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to get revisions and you might be angry. And you might feel that the editor is wrong and this was your idea and you've been married to this idea and this idea is right. And I cannot tell you how many times, 2 days later and authors come back to me and said, you've got a point. So just try to keep an open mind and really don't look at it as someone who is critiquing your work in the spirit of making you feel bad. They're critiquing your work in the spirit of making your work the best it can be and making you look the best that you can.
That's an incredible distinction. Is that in this process of traditional publishing, or even if you're working with a freelance editor, that the person you're partnering, it's a partnership. It's a balance of the editor is looking for success for both themselves and for you. I think that no editor goes into the relationship thinking, well, this will be the last time I talk to them. I think editors are looking for longer-term relationships and multiple books.
Yes.
And once they've worked with you and they understand the market and they know how your books are going to land, it's a big process. It's a big deal for them.
It really is. And also, too, some editors will see opportunities in the marketplace because, remember, they're operating on a publishing schedule. They know what's coming a year and a half before it's going to be published. You won't.
Exactly.
They'll know.
So they know trends.
Yeah.
They know things that are coming up.
Exactly.
They know that there's going to be, there's a huge book landing that's going to be in your space. So then maybe they would push it further out so that you didn't have to compete with a book that was, from a larger author or someone who was more established. So, the editor is really trying to make sure that all those things that are visible to you make sense, but then there's a whole bunch of invisible things that you won't know about.
Little things, too. Sometimes an author can be very repetitive, and, a third person can come in, your editor can come in and say, too much. You've established it. We need to move on. Sometimes it can be rearranging the order of the book. There's been situations where I've said, okay, this whole section does not belong here. It belongs, further in the book. Another thing, the book doesn't start in the right place. Take out this first 3 pages and start the book here. So an editor is nothing to be scared of. They really are just coming at your work, trying to help your message be as strong as possible.
And truthfully, if you are working with an editor and you have that good relationship and they bring something up about the story not starting in the right place or something being out of place, if you have a valid reason, you should share that reason. It's not like it's not a one-way street with the editor. So you have to be comfortable saying, well, here's why I did this. Here's why I want to have this story here. And sometimes through that collaboration, you find a happy medium and you're both happy.
Usually what will happen is if an author comes back to me and says, this is what I wanted to accomplish, then I'm able to go back and say, okay, that didn't accomplish it, but what will? Let's look at, because you're trying to create this message, maybe you could, because I'll make suggestions. I'll say maybe this, maybe that, maybe this. The author can choose. I'm just here to tell you there's a problem in the book that needs to be addressed because it's unclear.
Right. Help me help you.
Yeah. And this is a small thing, but I do want to mention it. Little things like there have been times I've worked in books where local terms, local colloquialisms were used that people outside of that small area didn't know what it meant. And so even just being able to go in and say, I don't know what this means. Explain it or use another term. When you're a writer, you don't think about someone on the other side of your country reading the book who may not know your little expression that's local.
Yeah, in the spiritual space specifically, there may be terms or experiences and there's a little fire truck going on behind us.
It's because we're so hot.
But there might be terms or significant places or experiences or energy levels or inexplicable things that you don't really even have words for, so you have to make them up, or you have to name them, or the names were given to you and you downloaded them, or whatever it is. Editors can help you position those phrases so that the reader, the audience, doesn't feel disconnected from the work. You want people to stay with you. You want that thought process to continue as they're reading your book or going through it, and so they can help you do that. And then the purpose of writing your book, the teaching or the system of transformation or whatever it is that you're creating in your book can work better. You can get more of the result you're looking to create by having an editor on your team. So one of the things I also wanted to talk about is what are the types of editing that happen? Because I know that we've talked I know about copy editing, but I know that there's a lot more that happens to the book as it goes through the process. So what are some of those types of editing?
I'm going to touch on 3 different stages. There's the developmental edit, the line edit, and the copy edit. Okay. Your developmental edit is usually your first edit that an editor will give you. That's top line issues. They're not going in every little tiny detail. It might be, you go off message here, or this part with the angels didn't quite make sense. We'll tell you what the bigger issues are. Structural stuff, things that need to be emphasized or expanded, things that need to be cut. So it's usually the broad strokes is what you get from a developmental edit. After that, the book will go back to the author, and the author will make changes. It'll go back for a line edit. And what that is an editor is going through line by line, making sure everything reads properly and makes sense. An example of this, and I'm going to use an example from fiction, is, 1 minute a couple is in the kitchen having a discussion, the next minute they're outside by the car. We never see them get from the kitchen to the car. So an editor will be like, hey, we'll either put it in for you or say you need to get them to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the car. Little moments that are dropped that will make sense in an author's head but aren't onto the page. So that's when they really go through line by line. That's very detailed. After that point, it goes to a copy edit. And what a copy editor is going to do is go through and check your spellings, your references, if there's anything that might need to be flagged for the legal team. If you're quoting another source, a copy editor will flag that. So the copy editor is the one who really goes in at the very end with the grammar and the style of the book, sentences. They'll also help with some of the setup for the person who's going to typeset.
Okay, so before we even get to typeset,
we don't need to do that, so skip that.
So, is the editor that you work with, your partner, is not the same person that's doing the structural edits or the copy editing? That's usually someone further down the line as part of the editorial team, correct?
No, your editor that you work with is going to do the developmental edit and the line edit.
Okay.
The copy editor is usually someone different.
Okay.
Because that's a whole different they're looking for something completely different.
So in that process, when you receive that developmental edit back, does it become clear what the editor's really trying to shape your book into? That's what they're really trying to do. They're trying to reshape the book.
Yes, and usually they'll be very long because we want everything in writing, and unfortunately the long letters scare authors. But again, read it, take a deep breath. Mm-hmm. But yes, you'll see it in the letter because it'll go in and say, here's the positives, here's the things that need a little more work. And then, I'll go through and give examples and say, on page so-and-so, when this happens, this wasn't communicated correctly or in a way that I understood, or hey, let's strengthen that. And it'll show you the direction that the editor wants you to go. Usually it's just looking at your words. Is there a way to make things a little more vibrant, pack a little more punch? Things like that. That's what's going to come out. But you'll get a clear understanding of it from the letter after the first development edit.
I mean, okay, so then after that, so that's like the process of creating the actual book and shaping it.
Yes.
From there, then we're talking about art direction. We're talking about the interior pages being designed. That's all something that's handled by
someone else.
So that's that's the art department. But your editor's with you every step of the way.
Yes.
Making suggestions, trying to figure out what's going to work, open to feedback, open to direction.
Yes.
All those things are possible. So I don't think anyone should ever feel like, okay, well, now that edit's done, I'm going on vacation, and I'll see you when the book's up, published and printed. No. And you should stay involved. I mean, listen, are there authors who have completely checked out? There are. I don't think it benefited them, and I don't think it benefited their book. Mm-hmm. Editors are there to answer your questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. They're your point person at a publishing house. And if you're nervous about asking them questions, if you have an agent, you contact your agent and you let your agent ask them the question. Mm-hmm. But everybody's on your team.
Everybody's on your team. It's not, a them versus me. And, you need to trust in your vision and you need to trust in their expertise, but it doesn't mean you have to sit quietly and not ask questions and not challenge things. Mm-hmm. Just remember, it's a respectful space and we're all professionals. Just my advice is it's a learning process, so keep an open mind because no one's your enemy.
Yeah, and be open to defending your work. I think if there's something that comes up and somebody has a question about it, do your very best to describe what you're hoping to achieve. I think we said that before.
Yes. And usually what it is just a misunderstanding. Usually it's a approach by the author that didn't quite hit the mark, and so it created confusion. But once there's been, once you talk to someone about what you were trying to accomplish, they'll be able to help you with that.
Perfect.
And compromise.
This episode of the Spiritual Business School podcast is brought to you by the Mooniverse. If you're a spiritual entrepreneur and you've been looking for a way to launch the spiritual business you've always wanted to have, come on over to themooniverse.com and find all the resources you'll need to start your business faster and easier than you ever thought possible. When you sign up for my newsletter, you're going to get access to my Spiritual Business Startup Guide. It's a downloadable and printable chart that covers 6 key areas that you need to focus on if you're going to make your spiritual business a big success. So come on over and see what we have going on, join our online community on Facebook, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, and take an exciting new step on the journey to becoming the spiritual entrepreneur you are destined to be.
So my first big question is going to be, how does somebody get a book published in today's day and age? Like, especially in the spiritual space, because, of course, writing a murder mystery is a totally different thing than writing a spiritual book. And so how does somebody go about the process of, I've already wrote the book, I already have the idea, like maybe that's already done, or I haven't even started yet. What's the first thing I should think about when I enter the idea of, like, maybe I should get this book published?
I think one of the most important starting places is to have a very clear central focal point of your message. One of the biggest challenges I see authors struggle with, and when an author struggles with it, it extends through to the end product. You'll see the sales team struggle with it. The consumers struggle with it, is a book that has too many ideas and isn't focused enough. I know it's very exciting, especially if you're writing your first book. You have a lot of thoughts, you have a lot of things you want to include, and sometimes it's hard to edit that back. But I really encourage you to take a look. An exercise I recommend is, if you have a sheet of paper, draw a circle, and in the middle of that circle write what your central theme is. Is it meditating for higher conscious? Is your theme 9 steps to help stressed mothers be more spiritual? Is your idea, vision boarding and ways vision boards can help you manifest your ultimate dream? Whatever that central idea is, put it in the middle of the circle. And then as you have other ideas, draw a line to those other ideas and really think about how they all feed into your central idea. You're the expert. I mean, you're writing a book that you're sharing your expertise with. So, the consumer's going to assume you've had experience and success with this program. So really be sure that you have a strong, solid message and that you really know your stuff about this message and how all messages after that feed into that central message.
Right, and this is great because this is a wonderful reinforcement of the idea of niching, because this is something I think a lot of people struggle with, and they're like, okay, well, I'm an energy healer. And it's like, okay, well, I love that you're an energy healer. That's totally great, but how much further could you go with that niche? How much more specific can you get about the type of services or support or the systems like you're talking about that you're providing so that the consumer immediately knows this is the book for me? This book is basically like my soul in book form that I've been, that I see on a bookshelf and I'm going to reach out and grab. That level of familiarity, that level of like total and complete connection is what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you, you're never going to write a book and have it just be one other person experiencing what you're experiencing. We're all in this together. There's a collective consciousness when it comes to these types of things. There's no way that one person is going to be into past lives and pick up a Brian Weiss book, or only one person's going to be into angels and pick up a Doreen Virtue book. The idea that you have, depending on where you niche it, there will always be, and this I think is true, and we can state this, there will always be an audience. So when I say niche, and I think I'd love a little bit of more support from you on how you view niching. But the way we set it up is you pick a category, and then you pick your specialty, and then you pick your niche. So for example, for me, I know that I'm in the spiritual category. Like I'm in this, like if I go to Amazon, and this is what a lot of people suggest people do when they're thinking about writing a book, or they're kind of trying to figure out what their niche is going to be. They go to Amazon and they start looking at the book categories, and they kind of try to figure out, where would my book fit in to these categories? Am I health and wellness and dieting? No, not really. Am I spirituality and religion? Maybe. Am I more business? Am I this? Am I that? And figure out what that category is. And then from the category, like, what is your area of specialty? So for me, mine is, my category is spirituality. My specialty is spiritual businesses. And then, if you go even further down, then the niche for me is helping people launch energy healing businesses, helping people launch angel businesses, helping people launch, intuitive and psychic coaching businesses. And so I've niched down into a couple of different areas because I've had so many requests of, okay, I know you do this, but can you also do this? But can you also do this? And, it took me a long time to be able to get to these and be able to speak to them all in an area of expertise. And I would not suggest anybody do it that way, because really you should pick your one niche. Start out with one thing, do that thing really well, and then go and do something else. So can you talk a little bit about that niching process?
What I want to tell you is just don't get discouraged. Don't compare yourself to bigger names. Understand the genre and understand what's needed in the genre and understand what you're looking for. But don't feel that in order to be big, you have to be all things to all people out of the gate.
Yeah, we can't be the all-you-can-eat buffet.
No,
that's what I always call it, the all-you-can-eat buffet.
You're better off starting out in a space that that has a clear focus, appeals to a niche audience, and you really grow your voice as the expert in this space. And then as you get more fans, more people who know your work, as you're more established in the spirituality space, you can branch out and add to the brand you've established. Again, Muni's the expert on that. I'm just here to talk about the publishing space, but it does all work together. And when you can go into publishing a book with a strategy and a vision that hits a lot of different notes, like marketing, like brand building, then you're already ahead of the game, because most people don't know how to back up and support their book the way it needs to. And a publisher is going to help you to the extent that they can, but smart business people cannot assume that they're going to get hundreds of thousands of marketing dollars with a publisher, especially first time out of the gate. So, be smart about the way you structure your book and the way you structure your message, and let it grow from there.
So I think what we're trying to say a little bit too, it's just to back up and circle back to what we're talking about, because I think there's two ways of discussing publishing. I think there's a global perspective of publishing, and then there's a very specific perspective of publishing, where I think both of them apply at the same time. So it's kind of hard to see both angles
It does.
at the same time.
It does.
But you have to. It's kind of like, you're splitting your brain in half and kind of doing the top level and the micro level approach of looking at something. But I think when it comes to the spiritual book, because this is something I've thought about doing for a long time, is writing a spiritual book about how to launch a successful spiritual business, or why the world needs spiritual leaders, or I still haven't figured out exactly what I want to put in there, but I know that I can't just write a book about spiritual businesses.
Yeah.
It's too wide of a niche, and there's too many things that I could say about it, and it's too all over the place. Mm-hmm. And I would really need to be able to bring it down to a level that makes sense. So let's say you were an energy healer and you wanted to write a book, and your book was about, quote unquote, and the title of your book was Energy Healing. That's problematic, because I think that there's so many other people who've done it decades before you, who are in their 10th or 12th or 15th publishing version, and that there's too much other noise, but there's too much competition in the space. Mm-hmm. However, if you were to write a book about energy healing for pets, or specifically cats, or specifically puppies, or specifically horses, or you wanted to create something that you were known for because it was A, what you were passionate about, and B, something that wasn't necessarily already done, quote unquote. That seems to be like the best and ripest opportunity, mm-hmm. or the best kind of looking opportunity for you to explore, because it's never been done before. Mm-hmm. That to me is like the difference, is like finding something that maybe was done before and done really great by Wayne Dyer or somebody like that. And it's like, could you really go and write another book that would outperform something Wayne's kind of already said and done? Yeah, absolutely. It could happen.
It absolutely could.
Would you have a better shot for making a difference with your book and getting eyes and ears on it if it was a type of book or a category of book or a niche of book that someone had never necessarily explored already? That gives you more to work with. It makes it more interesting and unique. It gives you opportunities for people to find you and want to do interviews and connect with you and learn more about it, versus like, ooh, am I going to buy this person I've never heard of? Am I going to buy their book, or am I going to buy Wayne's book, since they're kind of the same idea? Mm-hmm. And most people would already buy Wayne's book, I think, is usually the default setting.
But the beauty of that, absolutely, I agree with you. And that's not to discourage you, because it's not a discouraging space. I mean, obviously, in the spirituality world, there's a lot of books out there, but I wholeheartedly agree with Muni on this. You need to set yourself apart. One term that gets thrown around a lot in editorial meetings when acquiring, gets thrown out a lot in sales meetings, and it gets thrown out a lot in buyer meetings, is it's familiar but different. So you're letting them know that the book is in a familiar genre, it's accessible, it's going to make sense to the customer, but it's different in that it's different because it has a message that isn't already out there, or it's communicated in a way that sets it apart. So when you do think about, your message, your central focus, where you're starting with your book, your niche, mm-hmm. As the beautiful buzzword from Muni, really do think about who's it going to fit in with, but why is your voice different? And again, I cannot stress this enough. You are the expert. Use strong language. You maybe could try. That's a term we don't want to see. It's try this. This is going to work. I know it's going to work. Here are my real life examples of how it worked. Here's how it changed my life. Make that connection with your reader. Really be prepared to make that connection and build on that brand from there.
And I think that's important too, because that's something we talk about, is confidently being able to state who you are and what you do. And that comes across in your website copy, that comes across when you're shaking people's hands in an elevator, that comes across in your online courses or any interviews you give, and it certainly is going to come across in your book. You can't be uncertain about your ability to help somebody change their life while they're in the pages of your book, or even looking at the cover of your book, or even thinking about your book on Amazon, or even wondering if there's a book out there that will help them. No one's thinking, well, gee, I hope there's a book out there that maybe might give me something, but it won't be certain of itself, and it really won't be a guarantee that I can get anything. Or maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, but nobody wants to buy a book that's maybe going to help them. Do you know what I mean? I think that there's a book. If the book is uncertain of itself, then the people are going to be uncertain in trying to buy it, I guess is what I was trying to say.
We're in the energy space, and I think that energy it really does carry through.
Yeah,
I do. I mean, I from an energetic standpoint, I believe it does. And, hopefully you've got someone that can catch it and keep it from growing. But be confident, really be confident in your voice and what you have to say. Don't worry about the haters. It's a big world, and there's always going to be doubters and people who think you need to prove something. You don't. Your mission is to share your spiritual journey or your spiritual success story with the world so that they too can be successful in their own lives. So
right, and I always joke around with everyone and say that you haven't really made it until someone tears you down online, which is unfortunate reality of it is that you get to a certain point and somebody's going to have some sort of darkness or pain in their life, and they're not going to be able to process it internally, and so they're going to lash out. And you're the one that's out there trying to express this opportunity for growth and change, which can be scary and which can upset them or make them wrong somehow, which is not the intention, but sometimes it just happens. And here you are in a position where someone's going to write something terrible about you or leave you a bad Amazon review or, whatever else they could do to kind of leave some sort of hate mail out there for you. And you kind of have to imagine that it's a badge of honor. Don't be afraid of it, because it's a badge of honor. All of a sudden now,
I love it.
You've got people, because if there's everything's in balance. If somebody out there is saying something terrible about you, there's definitely somebody out there saying something incredible about you. So usually you don't hear the incredible stuff. Usually you only hear the squeaky wheel. But you have to know. You have to kind of go in with the mindset, and I think this is true from everything we've experienced. Is there definitely is that balance between those two parts of it.
Yeah, and sure. I mean, it's funny. It's worth considering. A friend of mine, who was it? Actually, I think it might have been an article I read. The woman was writing about haters, and she said, I have a friend who hates puppies. Who hates puppies? And she's like, I know people that hated Harry Potter. Who hates Harry Potter? And
there's people.
Yeah, and you look at this successful mega million best-selling author, J.K. Rowling, and think about it. There's people that aren't fans of her work either.
Right.
But
I love that you brought her. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you because I want to say this. I love that you brought her up because she's the perfect example of. And there's a couple other examples I was going to bring up because I think they're funny because we were both at Hay House when this happened. But J.K. Rowling is a perfect example of somebody who never. I say this too. There's this idea that anyone who's anyone in the spiritual world started exactly where you, the listener, you guys listening. Are, which is, you have a hope and a dream, or a prayer and a wish, or whatever you identify this kind of message within you, this light within you that needs to be shared, but you have no idea how it's going to take form, and you have no idea what path is going to be illuminated, and all the twists and turns that are going to help get you there, or if it's even going to happen. Mm-hmm. And all you can do is express yourself and do something. And, J.K. Rowling's a perfect example of that. Her story, I don't know all the details on, but I know she was in a bad position. Mm-hmm. And she's on this train, and she's writing this book, and all she could do was express herself. And she expressed herself and expressed this story. And, it turned into this, bazillion dollar phenomenon.
Worldwide phenomenon.
And who's to say that couldn't happen to anybody listening right now? There's no rules. There's no rules that say you deserve it and you don't. There's no way to know if it could happen to you, and if it could happen to you, why wouldn't you try?
Absolutely. I mean, someone's going to be on that bestseller list. Why not you?
Right. And especially in today's day and age, especially in the spiritual space, Louise Hay is all but retired. Wayne Dyer unfortunately passed away. There's a lot of the teachers that have been putting books out for over a decade that maybe aren't doing it as much. And so there's a space that's being created for these new voices and these new opinions and these new viewpoints. And we as a culture are shifting and changing. So all of a sudden now, books that were written, 30 years ago, while still, totally powerful and relevant and still have their time and place, there's a different spin that you could put on things as it relates to social media or how we interact with people or new types of relationships or the change in what we believe as a culture or where we are in life right now. And I think that's what I love about some of these new books, and I wanted to bring this up, is that, there are Cinderella stories when it comes to books coming out of the blue. Mm-hmm. And I know at Hay House, it happened a couple of times while I was there. I know it happened a couple of times. Anita Moorjani is another example of that.
Oh, that was such a powerful book.
Yeah, and here's this story of this incredible woman who had an NDE and survived cancer, went into remission, on the table in the hospital, it died and came back, and was, this, I think it's called a spontaneous remission, is what happened. And she was cancer-free. and medical science couldn't explain it, and it's just something that happened. And Wayne Dyer found her story online, sent Hay House trying to figure out who she was, found her, and then she was offered a book deal almost immediately. So I feel like that is also something that's happened, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen, and that happens because she was brave enough to tell her story, share what had happened, share the transformation, talk about it, express it, put it out there. And I think a lot of us are guilty of this, and I was too, I think, for a long time, where I had this idea and I had this thing I wanted to do or this message I wanted to share, and I just couldn't get it out there. I couldn't figure out the words, couldn't figure out, my life, couldn't figure out this, couldn't figure out that, had all these kind of invisible blockages around me of like, oh, well, as soon as I get that done, then I'll be able to do it. As soon as I get this done, then I'll be ready. And no, there's really never the perfect moment. The perfect moment is now.
The perfect moment is now. Another story I think it's worth mentioning is The Secret, the book The Secret.
Oh, yeah?
I actually I was working at Simon & Schuster and their sales team during the high point of that book. It actually broke before I started. I think it was at Penguin when it broke, and then shortly after it broke, I ended up moving to Simon & Schuster.
And when the broke, what does that mean? So everyone knows.
Broke means it got big fast. It means that all of a sudden people are talking about it. It's showing up in the media, and accounts that passed on the book that did not want the book, the book made no sense to them, now are buying a lot of copies of the book and putting it at the front of the store because
it's a surge of interest.
Huge surge of interest. You'll see this happen sometimes if there's a lot of times with nonfiction. You'll see it with big media, like if there's a war, you might see, or if there's a public figure who passes away. I'm sorry to say, but then there's a renewed interest. But with The Secret, I mean, when that book came out, it was, I think, very small, very, very small. Just because it was,
Well, no one had heard of it.
No one had heard of it. What is The Secret?
What is this? Yeah.
And so, I mean, it went in, in small numbers to just in section in stores, your self-help spirituality. And then, all of a sudden, I think someone put a copy in Oprah's, word of mouth spread about this book. I think Oprah got on board with it. And then, of course, once Oprah had it on her show, then sales went through the roof. But that's another point I want to make is that, starting small is not something to be scared of, because once your book is out there, it's out there, and it has so much room to grow.
This has been so great. I really appreciate you coming, Sharon. We're going to have Shannon on a whole bunch because there's so much more we can talk about editing. There's so much more we can talk about publishing. I know that we can spend an entire episode talking about how to find an agent or how to find the right agent that's right for you, about, how to, on your website or on your platform, how to make sure that you're attractive to a publishing company and an agency, which is a whole other discussion in itself. And there's just a million more things we could talk about. Again, this has been an incredible conversation with Shannon Godwin.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, listeners. I'm very excited that you're all, contributing to the self-help spirituality, publishing space, and I want everyone to be successful. We need it.
We do need it.
We need it.
Absolutely. All right, thank you. And I'm going to see you very soon because we're going to be doing a lot more of these. All right, everybody, have a great week, and we'll see you next week on our next episode. Bye.
Bye.